Yeah, I've got my coat on. May take it off before we get done, but I'd like to welcome everyone this morning. It seems like we've had an unusual number of people walking about that I don't recognize your faces, which usually that means visitors. So we're very glad to have you visiting with us this morning, and we hope that this time that you're spending with us is edifying, encouraging, that it will help you to learn things and motivate you to be better in whatever pursuits you have that would be toward God. We appreciate your spiritual interest. There are a lot of people who have no spiritual interest at all these days, and it is always refreshing and encouraging to see people that have a spiritual interest and are pursuing things that relate to God. So, again, we appreciate your presence here. I want to say to start with that this lesson is for me, okay? So if at some point in time you feel like I'm pointing fingers at you, well, that's on you, okay? Because I did this study because there are things that I needed to develop in myself. And one of them I've already touched on. Let's see here. I did I think it was a short lesson a while back, maybe last summer, about resilience. And it's something that's very desirable, I think. Interestingly, if you look at a concordance or do a Bible word search with most of our modern translations, you will not find resilience as one of the words that's present in the Bible. But I think if you were in our class this morning in 1 Peter, there were a lot of things that tie in directly with the resilience, because 1 Peter deals with having hope in persecution. And there are various types of persecution. There are various struggles that we face in life. And we need to have hope. And hope is a component of resilience. And so I'd like to do a little bit of introduction. And when studying this for myself and the needs that I have, I did a bit of studying in secular information and then tried to tie that into how does that fit in with what I also know from the Bible. And we do this, I think, quite often. We're talking about evidences for God. Oftentimes we study the Bible as an evidence and information it provides us for understanding who God is, what he wants from us. But then we'll also tie in things like mathematics and physics and biology and astronomy and things like that from the secular world to help us understand and sorry, my screen here is doing weird jumpings around. Anyway, it's back where it needs to be. But so we use a combination oftentimes of secular information and Bible information to get a complete picture of things. And so that's kind of what I'm doing today. So, I've been touching on things that I know I need to grow in and to get better in, and resilience is one of those. And so we're going to talk about that and make some spiritual applications to how we develop and practice resilience. There was an article that I read, a secular article, and it was a study done in okay. Okay, I think it's, hopefully this will work. So now I lost my train of thought. But, there's a study that I looked at and is shared on a short lesson, and it was done by polling and doing a survey with, sorry, my screen is going all over the place here on, it's a distraction. It was on elderly people, and what they surveyed was trying to find out, okay, what parts of life up to this point in elderly people lead to them being the most resilient? What things contribute to their resilience? And they came up with that there were three main things that were characteristic of their lives that were common among the people that were thriving in their later years of life. Okay. I'm going to bounce ahead. There are several things where resilience is helpful and benefits us. I'm going to skip over those so that we can keep moving forward. But there were three things that contributed to elderly people thriving later in life. And all of them begin with the letter P. And so I came up with this thought, 3 Ps equal R, three things that contribute to resilience. The three key factors that contributed to resilience in this population was one, the ones that thrived later in life were people that had purpose in their lives. So they had goals and direction and meaning in their life. I thought, wow, that sounds like what would be a good description of a Christian, right? And then they also had a sense of possibility. That is, they were people that were by nature optimistic, and they see the potential in circumstances and situations. And they have a sense of hope in their lives. And I thought, what, did we mention hope this morning anytime? Yeah, 1 Peter 1, I bet you hope got mentioned a number of times, the resurrection of the dead and surviving past those persecutions. So a sense of optimism, that's a very biblical concept. And then the other thing that helped them to thrive later in life was having people in their lives, strong social connections and support. And that's one of the benefits that we should be having by being a body of God's people, is that we have people that love us and care for us, and they're helping to support us. And so I found these things to be very intriguing, and if we will optimize these, then that will help to build resilience in us. So what exactly is resilience? Resilience is a tendency to bounce back following a defeat, a disappointment, or a tragedy rather than staying down. A tendency to bounce back, so that's the key word for resilience, is bouncing back following a defeat, disappointment, or tragedy rather than staying down. It is not about living a carefree life. If I'm living a carefree life, I am not going to have resilience. Those two are not synonymous. So what it is about is experiencing negative, difficult, and distressing events and staying on task, optimistic, and high functioning. Experiencing negative, difficult, and distressing events, maybe like persecution, would be an example of that, and staying on task, optimistic, and high functioning. Those sound like a lot of what we've talked about in 1 Peter 1. It requires emotional distress for it to develop. We must experience emotional distress to learn how to deal with it. An initial failure or being overwhelmed is often implied, in spite of the comments from number 2, that we stay on task, optimistic, and high functioning. There is the concept that at some level we have to be taken down a notch to where we're not as high functioning maybe as we were, or maybe we become non-functional for a period of time, but then we bounce back, okay? But if we never have an emotional distress, we will not learn resilience. I find that from a Christian standpoint, this is very helpful. These are very helpful concepts. So, some recommendations that come out of people trying to develop resilience in their lives is, one, to do hard things. You know, we know this in so many areas of life. If you're in athletics, you don't become a better athlete by sitting on the bench and doing nothing. You have to go out and push yourself, and you have to experience some pain in order to push your body and make your body stronger or faster or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. We have to do hard things in order to be able to face the realities effectively. And so we do hard things. I just came across an article recently that the key concept in it was seek discomfort, because it is in discomfort that we learn to overcome things. And so we need to learn to do difficult things and face discomfort. I remember Bob Buchanan was preaching a meeting here several years ago, and actually he used the phrase do hard things then. I remember at the time he was saying every month he does something that deprives himself, because that's building his resilience, it's building his willpower to be able to face other difficult things. We learn how to face difficult things by experiencing difficult things. And so the month that he was here, he says, I'm not drinking any coffee this month. I love coffee, but I'm not drinking any coffee this month, just as a personal exercise. He wasn't binding that on anyone else, just as a personal exercise, so that he would be developing and building up his willpower, his resilience in other areas as well. So the goal is, the mindset is, I need to build some calluses now to avoid getting blisters later. If I'm not using my hands and building up calluses, then when I do have to use them, I get blisters, and that's worse than doing work ahead of time and building up calluses. This is the concept of building resilience. Another thing is to look for the positive. A part of developing a resilient attitude is to look for the positive. And there's a lot of literature out there, non-religious literature, that is praising the benefits of having an attitude of gratitude. And it's helping people to reduce anxiety and to be more resilient and to be able to face adversity more effectively. Well, the whole New Testament is... How many times did Paul say, rejoice in the Lord always? And again, I say rejoice, while he was in prison. So looking for the positive, had an attitude of gratitude, being thankful always and giving thanks to God for all things is something the Bible promotes for us to do. And that creates a hopeful sense about us. That's beneficial to us to have those traits. A third thing, the people part of this. We can choose our people lots of times. And we can choose the people to be around us. Sometimes we choose people that just encourage us to be who we already are. And there's no growth in that. I mean, it's nice and it's helpful to have someone that recognizes who we are in terms of maybe our struggles, our personality, or things like that. But we also need people that will identify to us how to become better people. And they will not allow us to be satisfied with complacency. And so we need encouragers around us. Have you chosen any encouragers around you? We need truth tellers around us. People that will be honest with us, tell us what we need to hear, maybe not necessarily what we want to hear, and hopefully do that with kindness. The two are not mutually exclusive. We need work warriors, people that will join hands, pull arms together, and let's get a task done. And there's encouragement in numbers where we try to do things together, have a common vision that we work together. And then we also need grace givers who expect the best out of us, but are willing to forgive us when we don't have our best. Grace givers who expect your best, but will be patient with us when we fail to give our best. Those are important types of people to have around us. If you think about any of these kinds of descriptions, and you're thinking, okay, who in my life, who do I know that's like that? When I think of each of these components, if I think, okay, who jumps to my mind first? Pretty much in every case, it's a Christian. It's someone in my spiritual family. And I'm thankful for that. An attitude of gratitude. And I need to work harder so that I don't be a disappointment to them. They will give me grace. They expect the best out of me. And when I fail, they'll give me a hand and lift me up. Those are things we need, and that's part of resiliency. So hopefully just with these descriptions, we can see that these are very scriptural concepts, and the church family is very capably prepared by God to fulfill these roles in helping us reach our potential through resiliency. Resilience is also tied to growth. We're bouncing back from adversity, things that we failed at in the past. Now we do better. Maybe we're able to not fail at them anymore, and that's considered growth. Okay, and so there's this, and actually Andrew used this chart, I think, several years ago before he left, but Andrew Beam. But this is considered a growth chart. And we've got these zones, okay? So we have a comfort zone. That's where we like to be, right? In our comfort zone. That's where everything is going smoothly. There are no ruffles or ripples in the water. I can just cruise, and that's great. I love that comfort zone. But then we have a zone where there's challenge and struggle. And then there's also a zone that's actually dangerous, danger zone. And the question is, where does growth occur? where are we going to grow best in these various zones? And the fact of the matter is that the comfort zone is not where we grow best. Matter of fact, that's not a zone of growth. It's a zone where we are in stasis. That means we stay in the same place. And it's hard to stay in the same place, because if we're just doing what's comfortable, we actually tend to digress. And so the comfort zone is a place of stasis and digression. Sometimes we need the comfort zone. We need to be comfortable in some areas. It can be a place of healing and recuperation, but that's not the place we need to live the rest of our lives. So we may need the comfort zone, but we also need to be growing. And to grow, we need challenges. We need to struggle. We're not going to grow or be challenged, or we're not going to grow without struggle and challenge. That's where we develop our muscles. That's where we develop our willpower. That's where we get our strength. And then sometimes we can be challenged so much that it actually harms us. And that's something we need to avoid as well. So there's balance that's involved in this concept of resilience and growth and trying to hit a growth zone. We need to be challenged and we need to struggle, but we don't need to do it to the degree that it damages us or others. And we have to consider our effect on others as well. These orange, I guess that's orange, the areas that are described as barriers, those are things that keep us in the zone that we're already in. Okay, and so maybe I'm in the comfort zone, and maybe I'm thinking I need to step out of my comfort zone. I need to do some things that will help me build resilience, so I need to be challenged, I need to struggle. And so what would be a barrier to that? Well, a very common barrier is fear. Because if I want to take on something new, if I want to grow, then I'm doing something that's a little bit unknown to me. And often fear accompanies that, and fear may prevent us from being proactive and may keep us in the comfort zone where we're going to end up eventually having stasis and digression. Sometimes our history may keep us in the comfort zone or prevent us from going into the challenge and struggle zone where we can grow. What do I believe about my circumstances, and how does that affect my effort or ambition? It might be something related to me growing up in a certain socioeconomic status, and I'm trying to grow, but I think I'm limited because of my background. Or it might be something that's racial, it might be something of family dynamics, it might have been a number of things that we experienced in our past that cause us to be fearful about stepping out of what's comfortable for us. But we have to be intentional. If we're going to grow, we have to get out of our comfort zone and overcome the barriers that keep us in the comfort zone. Another illustration of this is going from the comfort zone to the growth zone. And this illustrates some of the things that maybe serve as barriers, but there's actually subzones that we can go through. The comfort zone is where we feel safe and in control. The fear zone is, and my glasses are, okay. Better up there. Find excuses, I can see that now. Lack self-confidence. So those are things that would keep us in the fear zone and prevent us moving to a growth zone. There's then a learning zone. And that's where we deal with challenges and problems and acquire new skills. We need new skills to grow. And we extend that comfort zone. And as we embrace that learning zone and we're acquiring new skills and we're dealing with challenges that come our way, we then start moving into the growth zone where now we're in a new level. It's, gaming, which I don't do really any of, but, you go to different levels in the games. And, now you get to a new level and it's not acceptable to go back to previous levels, is it? You grow into a new level of experience and expertise. You don't want to go back to what used to be the comfort zone. Now your comfort zone has changed because you've reached a new level and now you're comfortable at a higher degree than you used to be, but that's continued growth. We keep moving up into higher levels, and then our comfort level is moving as well so that we become more experienced. This should describe the Christian's life, is that we are growing and we are developing. And so the question I have, and I said this is for me, do I have a growth and resilience mindset spiritually? Am I seeking hard things that will help me to have to struggle and face some hardship and adapt and develop new skills, acquire new knowledge. Do I embrace that, or do I run away from that? Do I have a growth and resilience mindset? So, in 1 Peter, we talked a lot about persecution and hardship from persecution, and a lot of that was dealing with pressures from the outside. You know, those that are not Christians that are, persecuting Christians in various ways. Sometimes our growth challenges may come from within. And that 1 Peter is not, I don't think, dealing with that as much as dealing with the forces and pressures that come on us from the outside. But sometimes our pressures can come from the inside. And the church at Corinth, I think, is a great example of that. And so, again, putting this in perspective, this congregation has had a number of challenges over the last several years. And we could probably, if we made a list, there will be some things that are common on everyone's list, and there might be some things that are different for the different people in our congregation. But there have been challenges. And so when I say this lesson is for me, thinking in terms of resilience and growth, when I'm talking about those things that I've just went through, I don't know about you, but I find that appealing. That's energizing to think, okay, how can I grow? How can I become more? That's an exciting thing. But as was pointed out in dealing with the persecutions and having patience through persecutions, that is a way we grow, but it's not fun. The growth is not fun. And so I've been thinking, how do I show resilience? How do I practice resilience, and how do I practice growth in this congregation? What do I need? Not what do you need, or you. What do I need to be an effective grower in God's kingdom in this congregation? And these are going to be common to a lot of congregations, although there are going to be some things that are unique in each congregation. For instance, the church at Corinth, they had preacher clubs. I'm speaking facetiously. I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Peter, Cephas. They had their favorite preachers, and it's like they had clubs. Okay, and so maybe this side is the preacher Peter group, and this is the Paul group, and this is the Apollos group. And everybody in our lane, we're together. We're in harmony, we're the same. But then they had some sexual problems. I put incestuous with a question mark because I think in my mind, there's some uncertainty exactly whether that fit what definition of incestuous in chapter 5. But it's often referred to as being incestuous. That was going on in Corinth. And then in chapter 6, they sued me. How could they call me down to a courtroom? I'm sitting over here, they're sitting over there, and never the twain shall meet. Right? Sexual immorality, participating in harlotry, marriage and divorce issues, ties to idolatry and personal conscience, assembly and worship issues. How do we do the communion? Who gets to teach when and where, and by what gift of the Spirit do they do what they do and what do I do? There are resurrection doctrines running amok, different views on the resurrection. And then there's instructions needed for needy saints, and this may not be actually all of them that are listed there. How do we deal with those things effectively and in a way that honors God? We've got all these means and opportunities for division. And here we have the church building, and got my side and their side. Of course, my side is on the right side. Yeah, all right? Okay. And then there's the left side. And so, the preacher club, my preacher club, I'm a Paulite. So we're on the right, and all the Paulites sit on the right, and all the Cephasites, the Peterites, sit on the left. And actually, there is a third row in here, I think. But we need a third row for Apollos. But I just don't feel comfortable sitting next to the people I don't feel comfortable relating to. I don't feel comfortable maybe even singing with or talking to the people that believe, follow different preachers. That's kind of challenging. And so, this is my side on the right. Okay, but, this Sunday, the guy that sued me had the audacity to sit in the row in front of me. Okay, and he's got his fans, he's got his friends, and they sit around him, and I said, so we get up and we go to the other side. Well, wait, that's on the left side, that's the wrong side. And if you think about all the different things that can divide people, if I need all the right people to be where I sit in the building, and I'm using sit in the building as just kind of a metaphor for how we treat one another, guess where I'm going to be sitting before long? All by myself. Because, see, before I can be with people, every issue has to be answered in my way. And any issue that's different from my view of the issue has to be somewhere else. And we get division after division. What's a common solution for dealing with this kind of stuff? Well, when I was growing up, there's a city that I'd never been to, and it was referred to from time to time by Christians that I knew and respected and appreciated. And that city, they would always have this statement, the church is really strong there. I thought, oh, wow, that's neat. Church is really strong there. And then as I got older, I listening a little more carefully, and it may have been even after I left home and was in other places and was hopefully a little more mature and had more experience with things. But the reason why the church was considered to be strong there, because people often would add another descriptor after that the church is strong there. They would say things like, there's a church on every street corner. They had a lot of churches there. Churches of Christ that presumably we would agree on all practices, and we know that's a challenge. And I got to thinking, okay, at some point in time, there had to have been one church there. And I don't know the history, but, when did there become two? Maybe more importantly, why did there become two? And then there were three. And then there were four. And then maybe there's a dozen. Now maybe there's 20 or 25. Wow, the church is really strong there. If they were growing because the population was exploding and they didn't have room and resources to have everybody in one building, and so maybe it's a big city where it's a half an hour or an hour to drive across the city to get to a congregation, that could be maybe a healthy way for the church to grow in a city. But most times when there's multiple churches in one city, it's a sign that somebody is not resilient, that somebody hasn't grown. And what used to make me feel good about that condition of the church is strong in that city, I can't imagine any way that it got that way without it being a sad commentary. If someone can explain to me how that happens otherwise, please do, because I don't want to be malignant in viewing that. But resilience and growth. We need to be growing. We need to be resilient, and that means that we need to be making some changes. So how do we deal with sidism? That's what term I've coined for when we have disagreements about, various issues, and it can very easily to de-escalate or decline into factions. First of all, recognize that God recognizes there are factions and there will be factions. Because in 1 Corinthians 11, the church at Corinth, all these lists of things that we mentioned, it says factions reveal the genuine. Those that are genuine are revealed by the factions. And so maybe God has some use for that because the Word of God is like a sword. It's a divider of the thoughts and intents of the heart. Divides between the marrow and bone. And so when we respond to God's Word in ways that are not according to the way He intended His Word, that tells God something about our hearts. It may tell us something about each other's hearts. So factions are a reality, and they are maybe a necessity, or it's maybe an eventuality, because not all of us, maybe I, don't have as pure a heart as I should have. And maybe I'm not dealing with controversy the way that God has prescribed. There are some things, 1 Corinthians 5, verses 9 through 11, there are some things that are not acceptable among brethren. And we have to make an observation and a note of that. Paul said in those verses, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the sexually immoral of this world, or the greedy and the swindlers or idolaters, since then you would need to go out of the world. But now I am writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of a brother if he is guilty of sexual immorality, greed, idolatry, a reviler, a drunkard, a swindler, not even to eat with such a one. Okay, so there are some lines that need to be drawn at times among our brethren, and that's to help hold us accountable, to help to draw us, help us to grow, to face adversity and to grow, get out of our comfort zone and into our growth zone. That is a function that we serve for one another. But if you go to 2 Corinthians, and by the way, 2 Corinthians was not being written to the second church in Corinth. It's the same one church, okay? And in 2 Corinthians 2 and verse 6, Paul wrote that, and so the incestuous relationship in 1 Corinthians 5, presumably he's talking about that situation. And this person had been marked, and they had stopped eating with this person, as was described in 1 Corinthians 5. And in verse 6 of 2 Corinthians 2, it says, for such a one, this punishment by the majority is enough. Okay, this person had been caused to repent. The punishment by, wait a second, the majority? What is that, 51? 75%? 90%? It wasn't unanimous. And so we have people in this church, some of them are following what Paul suggested that they or commanded them to do, but not everyone's doing that. We still have one church in Corinth, as far as I know. Well, we did back then at this time. So what's happening with these other people? And that's a question we don't know the answer to, but not everyone participated. And you might note that in 2 Corinthians, Paul spent a good bit of his time in that book defending his apostleship. So maybe these are people that don't even believe that Paul is a legitimate apostle, and so they're not following his instructions. Still one church. Revelation 2, the church at Thyatira. Beginning in verse 18, and to the angel of the church in Thyatira write, the words of the Son of the church in Thyatira, the words of the Son of God, who has eyes like a fire of flame, and whose feet are like burnished bronze. I know your works, your love and faith and service and patience, endurance, and that your latter works exceed the first. But I have this against you, that you tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, and is teaching and seducing my servants to practice sexual immorality and to eat food sacrificed to idols. He goes on about giving her time to repent, but verse 24, for the sake of time, notice, but to the rest of you, so there's the Jezebel, who's a prophetess, and those that are caught up in that thing, but to the rest of you in Thyatira, who do not hold this teaching, who have not learned what some call the deep things of Satan, to you I say, I do not lay on you any other burden, only hold fast what you have until I come. Did Jesus know the people that were involved with Jezebel? And did he know the people who had made a stand against Jezebel but were still in the congregation? Jesus knows. He knows who's who. Revelation 3, verses 1 through 6, the church at Sardis is being addressed. And to the angel in the church of Sardis write, the words of him who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars, I know your works. You have the reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Skipping down to verse 4, yet you have still a few names in Sardis, people who have not soiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. Does God know the names of those who are not following what they should? Does he know the names of the few that have not soiled their garments? We don't read about multiple churches in Sardis. Why not just leave these situations? And this is a question that I've asked myself. You know, there have been challenges here, and I think, for the last several years, they've hit different people to different degrees. But these are questions that I ask myself. Like I said, this is for me. These are questions that I've heard other people ask. And so I'm looking for scriptural insight, and one of the things, the question is, why not just leave? And one reason that I'm not leaning that way to leave this congregation are there are going to have to be some pretty extreme circumstances before I would leave any congregation based on what I'm looking at, is that Jesus knows whose are his and whose are not his. And I may need to take stands for what I believe is right, but sometimes those don't have immediate effects. Sometimes I may be wrong. And I need to have patience in dealing with that, which is going to get us to our next level pretty quickly. So in the church at Corinth, 1 Corinthians 12 and verse 31, Paul tells the church at Corinth a still more excellent way for them to pursue. And then he goes into chapter 13 and talks about the love, the agape love. And this has already been read, so I'm not going to reread this. The traits of agape love are listed here. What I do want to do is give the definition of agape love and go through some slides quickly that illustrate the consistency of the Bible and these being traits that we need to master, that we need to become skilled at and adept at, and that's going to help any situation that we're facing. The word agape involves active goodwill. Active. It's not a feeling. It's something that we do. It's active goodwill, and it actively and graciously seeks what is in the best interest of others, their highest good. How often do we get upset with someone and we do anything but seek their highest good? Agape love, the love that God and Jesus showed toward you and I when Jesus died on the cross, was seeking our best good even though we were enemies and foreigners to him, because he wanted us to be his children. So he had to demonstrate agape love. It represents a selfless concern for others. It's a decision and action of the will, not necessarily of the emotions, although emotions are not excluded from agape love, to act favorably on behalf of others. It is independent of the recipient's actions or reciprocation. We don't do it for someone just so that they'll do it back for us. We're doing it because we have their best interest at heart, and we're going to seek that best interest whether they necessarily are thankful about it, grateful about it or not, or they're going to reciprocate. Those are features of the agape love. And in those definitions, I think that you will see that there's a lot of things that involve our purpose. What am I about? How am I dealing with people? It gives me a purpose for how to do things. Christ is my model, and I'm going to seek the best, what is in the best interest of other people. That gives me purpose in life. And do I see the potential that comes out of that? The hope that comes out of me treating someone that might consider themselves to be an enemy to me, or they might consider me an enemy, and yet I treat them and feed their best interest, and I do things that will be good for them and helpful to them. Do I see the potential for building a relationship out of that? Maybe a relationship where that person draws closer to God or comes to God to begin with? Do I see that potential? And how is this going to affect human relations, people-to-people relations? It's going to build them, make them stronger. It's going to build resilience in the way that we live. Here's all the traits of the love description in 1 Corinthians 13. I'm not going to read down those, but what I would like to do is compare it with the fruit of the Spirit. I always think of the fruit of the Spirit. There are 9 traits that are kind of the core qualities of God that most everything else is a growth out of. Here are the fruit of the Spirit from Galatians 5:22 through 24. The top list of that is love, which is the topic of 1 Corinthians 13. All these traits are traits that are components of love. So those are similar. Joy. Fruit of the Spirit has joy. The love of 1 Corinthians 13 rejoices with truth. We both call for a rejoicing. Peace. Peace is a component of love. And this builds peace both with men and with God. If we're patient, kind, we do not envy, we don't boast, we're not arrogant, we're not rude, we don't insist on our own way, we're not irritable, and we're not resentful, doesn't that help build relationships with people? So we can have peace with people based largely a big part on how we treat those people, but we don't rejoice in wrongdoing. That doesn't mean that everything is okay, that everyone is okay in their relationship with God. And so we don't rejoice in wrongdoing, we rejoice with the truth. And that gives us peace with God. Patience is a component of love. Not being irritable or resentful is a part of the fruit of the Spirit. Do I carry that into my relationships with the people that I'm around? Kindness is a part of love, and that involves not being rude, insisting on my own way, not being irritable, not resentful. Aren't those really practical suggestions as to how we demonstrate love toward one another? Goodness. I don't rejoice in wrongdoing. I rejoice with the truth. That would be characteristics of goodness. Faithfulness. Do I endure all things? Do I have patience and hope in persecutions and in trials? Do I never give up? Do I keep coming back? Do I have resilience in bouncing back in my service to God? That's faithfulness. Gentleness. If I'm kind, I'm not arrogant, I'm not rude, I'm not irritable, not resentful. If I'm hopeful of things, all those are features of gentleness, so they help me to fulfill that law of the fruit of the Spirit. Self-control, again, similar traits help me to develop self-control. So love is the better thing that Paul says is going to help the church at Corinth. There in chapter 13, just in the middle of all the different ways in which they have mistreated one another, turned their backs on God in various ways. Now, practicing this agape love is not necessarily going to fix everything. I mean, there's some things that require repentance. There are some things that require living differently. There are some things that require treating my brothers and sisters differently and better. There's a need for growth as a part of my resilience. But if I'm working on these things, and I think this is the point of 1 Corinthians 13, in the middle of all those things that Corinth is being drugged through, is that if I am focusing on the agape, if I'm focusing on God's love and showing that to my brothers and sisters, the other things are handled much more easily. They are a foundation for successful relationship building on what is truth, rejoicing in that truth. Do we see the purpose, potential, and people relationships from all of these? A few helpful concepts, and then we'll close up. I'll go through these quickly. First of all, helpful concepts. One is love and love. We've been talking about agape love, but in 1 Peter 1, which is part of our, I don't think we got there quite yet, but in the adult class, verse 22, it says, seeing you have purified your souls in your obedience to the truth, unto unfeigned love of the brethren, love one another from the heart fervently. Okay, that love of the brethren is the Greek word Philadelphia. The second love is the agape word, like we see in 1 Corinthians 13. And I think this passage ties these two together. The Philadelphia love, the love of brethren, is the friendly, the emotional kind of good feeling towards someone, like the Philadelphia city of brotherly love. What that would maybe bring to our thoughts. It's having good emotions and feelings about someone. That's the phileo love. And if I have that, then I'm probably going to treat them pretty well because I like them. And God has called us, we've purified our souls unto unfeigned likingness, liking one another. That's a goal. But then he says, in the pursuit of that, agape one another from the heart fervently. And the agape doesn't necessarily have to be an emotional outflow. It's actions of the mind, of the will, that are in the best interest of other people. And that agape love is surrounded by all those character traits we just got through looking at on those screens. That we're patient, we're kind, we have goodness. All those as we're dealing with the conflicts that might be present. So those are going to help us to do that, and it's going to help us to maintain a unity while we try to struggle through the challenges that face us in our interpersonal and maybe interdoctrinal relationships. So we need to try to show both types of love. Maybe I don't feel the phileo love. Maybe I don't feel emotionally positive about someone. That doesn't matter. If that's the way we feel towards someone, we need to start doing things that are in their best interest. Things that would help them, whether they return that to us or not. And what I think we find, and I bet there are a number of people that have experienced this, when we exert ourselves to show agape love towards someone, with a little bit of time, we start feeling better toward them. And that will build the phileo love. Those can be a growth of one another. From secular reading, but I think it's very scripturally based. I'm not going to go into the scriptures to give complete support of this, but empathy does not equal agreement. Sometimes we have conflicts, and we feel like that if we show any emotional positivity towards someone, that will be equated with we're in agreement with them or we're condoning what they're doing. Empathy does not equal agreement. An example of this is the situation I was reading from is that there was a hostage negotiator for the FBI that worked in this trade for like 20 years, had over 100 different hostage situations that he dealt with. And one of the key components of him dealing with hostage situations is that to do that successfully, he needed to know what the hostages wanted and why they were doing what they were doing. He had to be able to understand them and what they were looking for if he wanted to have any hope of getting the hostages out successfully. He needed to have empathy toward them. And once he had empathy, then he knew what he could do to meet those empathetic needs and be more successful in getting the hostages free. So let's not be confused into thinking that the fact that we're listening or that we're showing empathy towards someone, it means that we're condoning what they're doing. It's a part of listening. We need to listen to understand people that we have differences with, and it's only at that point that we have the best chance of helping them move in the right direction if we're in the right place. We need to know where they are. Another thing that came up in some readings is don't mistake abrasiveness for honesty. Don't mistake abrasiveness for honesty. Sometimes we get in this mode, sometimes we have to work at getting up our courage to say something to someone. And working up that courage sometimes means we have to kind of get brazen and hard-faced in order to be able to have the courage to say what we need to say. And that comes across as abrasive and maybe angry or maybe arrogant. Those are not good traits to display when we're trying to help someone get better, help someone do something in a better way. Love is kind. It may take work to be honest respectfully, but that's a goal that we need to shoot for, and that's part of our purpose goals. And finally, there's a difference between, and something that's helpful in controversial discussions is people, in terms that's used a lot nowadays, and some people like it, some people don't, but people need to feel safe in controversial discussions. And there's a difference between feeling safe and being comfortable. And a comment that I read that I thought was very helpful, we need to help them trust our intent. Our goal is not necessarily to make them comfortable, particularly if we're disagreeing and they're potentially wrong. We don't want them to be comfortable in doing wrong. But we need them to know that our intent is that we love them and that we want to help them and that we're there for their good. So we need to help them trust our intent, and then we need to have good intent. That's on our part. Sometimes we don't convey good intent because our intent is not good. It is important to distinguish between these. It's not just about being comfortable. And another quote, if a person can't handle feeling uncomfortable in conversations, they will be limited in their life. And I think that that's very true. If we can't allow for feeling some discomfort in conversations, and one of the things that helps me in that, and has been a fruit of some of these studies, is that those conversations help to build resilience. Because I feel some discomfort. I can grow from that. Now I can look at the difficult conversation as something that will help me grow rather than something I need to hide from. But we need to demonstrate that positive intent. Just as a quick example, he's apparently not here, but if Steve Newton came up to me and he had something that he thought I needed to hear, he would come up and he would probably have a few tears in his eyes and his upper lip might quiver a little bit, and he would put his hand on my shoulder and he'd say, "John, can we talk about something?" His intent would be clear, and I would feel safe to, let's talk about it, right? I mean, there are a number of people here that have been there with Steve, and so what are we conveying? Do we really care about each other? And do we convey that in our conversations? And if we each feel safe in that the other person's intent is positive, then it may get a little bit uncomfortable, but we can still be honest and open in how we deal with things. I think those are very helpful concepts. So growth appears here. And part of the whole benefit of this discussion and approaching it from the standpoint of resilience is that if someone asks me, do I need resilience and do I need to grow, I'm going to say absolutely. Those are desirable traits. Where do I sign up? Give me those things because I need them and I want them. But if we say, well, we'd like to have controversial conversation with you, well, not so much. But hopefully this helps us frame difficult conversations in a godly context as to how we can do this in a way that helps each other and shows real positive intent toward one another in a godly way that mimics his agape love and how he's shown that in our lives. It can be this kind of thing where, it's kind of a mixed bag. We may have one of these situations arise. We may initially start out with a frowny face and, oh no, here we go again. But then if we step back and have a perspective of resilience, we can then reframe our thought process and say, this may help me grow. I may be able to help other people grow. Let's go to this. And so hopefully that can help you as it has helped me to reframe some of the ways that I think and feel about difficulties. But as we said in class, persecution, pain is not fun, but it can help us grow and get us into new places. If you're not one of Christ's children, if you have never been baptized into Christ for the forgiveness of your sins, we would like to give you an opportunity to do that. If you need more information about what's involved in that, what is involved in being a child of God, we would love to study with you and share information on that. If you have needs for the prayers of this congregation in other ways, we would certainly be glad to join with you in that. If you have any needs of those nature, please come forward as we stand and sing.